I am really delighted to have Sue Stevens here tonight. You know, she's been in the news a fair amount recently for a variety of issues surrounding everything from her governing board to the Boeing land purchase to the whole new airport.
Right.
I still call this airport the new airport.
Me too.
Okay, good, good. When was it new?
1985.
That's right, that's
April.
right. It's still new.
Yep.
But you're also very active in the community and in your industry, which we all know is very important, and we're looking forward to finding out about some of your experiences. So let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
Where were you born?
Baltimore, Maryland.
So do you consider yourself a Southerner?
Yes,
Okay.
until I moved here. I always thought I was raised south of the Mason-Dixon line in the D.C. area,
Right,
Maryland, Virginia area, and thought I was a Southerner, but then I moved to Charleston and found out that didn't qualify.
It didn't, well, close.
I was a
close.
border state, so.
That's true. Tell us about your parents.
Let's see. My mom and dad were high school sweethearts, married for a while. I was 2 years old when they divorced. Mom was a single mom for most of my growing up years. Remarried, had other children, but then again ended up as a single head of household.
Wow.
Very, very dynamic woman who never went to college, but I was 16 before I knew that. I always thought she was so smart, she must have gone to college. And when I finally found out she hadn't, I was really kind of shocked. But a lot of who I am today and what I do is because of my mom and the things she taught me.
How would you describe yourself as a child?
Very responsible. I was the oldest of 5,
Ooh.
the only girl.
Ooh.
Mom worked a lot, so I babysat a lot. I did lots of chores. I learned to work first, play second, and I still struggle with that sometimes.
Wow.
But my husband's been a good counterbalance in that regard because he plays first, works second. So for some of you know him and know that's true. But that's a good thing.
Yeah, I love it. Did you have a nickname?
Susie. Not very creative.
Okay, okay.
I think that was the only one I would repeat that I can recall.
Do you have any favorite stories from your childhood?
Oh, gosh. I'm going to have to think about that one.
We can come back to that.
Okay.
But let's talk about your friends.
Okay.
Did you make friends that you've stayed in touch with?
Yes.
Childhood friends?
Yes. A handful.
Yeah.
Not a huge number. The high school I went to had 600 kids in the graduating class. So in a school that big, you don't tend to bond like you do in smaller classes. But I do have a handful of people I still stay in touch with. We actually have a big, won't say what year, but a big reunion coming up next year, or this fall, that I'm hoping to go back to. And then other friends, neighborhood friends, people like that I've stayed in touch with. When we moved here, one of the difficult things, and I think one of the best things you can do as a young person is move somewhere else from where you grew up, because it makes you grow and learn and find new friends, which isn't easy when you've had people that you've grown up with and you're used to. Moving here was a little challenging. In 1981, when we moved here, I was newly married. And my husband was with a company here in Charleston. That's what brought us here. And most of the women that I met through him were moms. Not a bad thing, but they weren't working. Or if they were teachers and nurses. Nothing wrong with that, but very traditional roles. And lots of conversation about soccer and swim team, and I couldn't really participate in that.
Right.
So I found myself wandering out and finding groups like this that helped me profusely. I think that really did make a big difference in my transition in Charleston. There was a group way back when called Charleston Women's Network, you may remember.
I don't think I was around for that, but I'm delighted to know it goes back.
It does. I don't think it still exists, but it did.
Well, you have the Center for Women now.
That's right. We don't need that anymore, which is a good thing. But that was very helpful to find people who I could relate to and had common interests.
Go back to school. How were you a good student?
Till 10th grade.
Ooh.
When I discovered boys.
Okay. All right.
I think I got through 10th grade with all really good grades, and then 11th and 12th I did the bare minimum.
Sports?
Didn't play. No. Little known fact. Grew up roller skating, not roller derby. Let me underline that.
Or rollerblading?
No, or not rollerblading.
Okay.
This is figure dance and freestyle skating competitively.
Really?
My stepfather was a coach, so I grew up, that was my sport. Yep.
So we won't go back to 11th or 12th grade. We'll just
No,
let
we
that,
won't.
we'll just
and
leave
I
it
really
there.
didn't plan to go to college.
Really?
Had no intention of going to college. Had a boyfriend, a car, and a job. What more did I need? And my mom kept nudging me and saying, you really need to apply, and I didn't think I was smart enough. And a school accepted me. Long story short, by way of Tucson, Arizona, I ended up in a community college in Northern Virginia, which is why I am such an advocate for community colleges now. I don't think I would have done well in a 4-year environment right off. Went to community college for 2 years, lived at home because that's all I could afford. It was semester to semester. And then transferred to James Madison University, which was Madison College way back then. Transferred to James Madison and finished my degree in 3.5 years. Not because I was smart, but because I didn't have a lot of money. So I just kept loading up on credit hours and got done quickly.
And you majored in business administration.
I did.
How'd you come to that?
Because I wanted to be self-sufficient. Watching my mother, I don't want to use the word struggle because she always did it with such grace. Struggle's not the right word. But I watched my mom have to be self-sufficient, and I was determined that I was going to be that way, that I was not going to depend on someone else for my livelihood, that I was going to be self-sufficient. So instead of doing psychology, which is what I really wanted to do, I did a minor in psychology and a major in business.
What was your first job out of college?
I was a secretary.
Did you learn how to type in college?
I did, actually in high school. Actually, that's where I discovered guys, as I recall.
Okay.
Anyway.
But you learned how to type as a backup. I love it.
I did. I did know how to type. I was good at it. Enjoyed it. I mean, I still like the keyboard. I don't find that to be objectionable. But I really didn't want to get out of 4 years of school and be a secretary. But graduating in December, there weren't a lot of other options. So I typed my way through college. I never waited tables. I never did the more traditional things you do in college. I typed. I did secretarial work and
Term papers?
Yes, but big documents for Navy contractors and all that kind of stuff. And when I finished school, I went back to one of those contractors, and they had an opening for a secretary. One of the things I learned was it's good to go to work for someone who has daughters that he paid for their college, because when he saw me come along with a college degree, he said, I will do everything I can to help you get past the secretary's job.
And did he?
And within 90 days, I had progressed to something called engineer scientist, which had nothing to do with my job. It was really just a job title in the contracting world. And that was my first break, if you will, to get into a more managerial track.
Right.
Did a lot of financial analysis and forecasting and those sorts of things, and progressed up. Had just found the job I really liked, with a boss I really liked, and he was doing well in this company that was really going places. And my husband said, what do you think of moving, well, my husband-to-be, what do you think of moving to Charleston? And I said, where? I mean, I'm sorry, I was one of those dumb Yankees, I'll say that didn't really know the difference between Charlotte and Charleston and North Carolina and South Carolina. So we came down here. I had never been unemployed, so I didn't think it would be a problem. And I got here and was only unemployed, let's see, about 60 days. Felt like forever, because this I hate to say this, it makes me sound so old. This was before the days of answering machines and cell phones. So you had to stay home and wait for the phone to ring, unlike today, or else you didn't get that job call. So I did a lot of that, and I went on interviews that went really well until we talked salary and things like that. And I would tell them about all the really neat things I had done, and had working on my master's degree and graduated magna cum laude and had all this neat job experience. And after each part, the response was, yes, but can you type?
What year was this?
1981.
Okay.
But can you type? And I actually found when I stopped fighting that is when things started to click.
You want to elaborate?
Yeah, you're not going to like this story.
Okay.
I give a lot of credit to someone named Sidney Stubbs. He was the Lucas and Stubbs, which is now LS3P. Sidney Stubbs interviewed me for an accounting position. Instead of, the newspaper wasn't working for me, so I got the phone book out in the Chamber of Commerce directory and looked for people who needed, for companies who provided professional services, because that's what I had done, was accounting for professional services firms. Management consulting, lawyers, doctors, those sorts of people. And I just started cold calling. And I got through to somebody who said, oh, well, yeah, we do have an opening. Why don't you come by? And I did. And I took off the power suit, if you remember the early 80s of the power suits, that were a little intimidating, especially in Charleston. Keep in mind I was coming from Crystal City, Virginia. And I got rid of the power suit and I put on a nice dress, very traditional, conservative.
Pearls.
And pearls. Exactly.
Proud of you. I'm proud of you. I don't have a problem with that.
And I had a job by that afternoon. And it was as business manager for Lucas and Stubbs, which turned out to be a great opportunity. I did accounting and payroll and all the things related to running the business.
Did you negotiate for your salary?
Heck no. I'm embarrassed to say, but heck no, back then.
I know.
That's been one of the biggest lessons for me, in that I have learned women traditionally wait to be recognized, whether it's in a classroom setting and we raise our hands politely, whether it's for a promotion, for salary increase. And I actually had it happen to me not all that long ago, gosh, probably 10 years ago now. I had gotten into the airport business, got my accreditation through a national association that does that. I had served on the airport boards, I had, or the aviation association boards, and had checked off all the boxes. My boss at the time, the former director, told me what a great job I was doing, but he wasn't sure that I would ever get to be an airport director in Charleston, South Carolina. And I kind of took that as a challenge, kind of, sort of.
You didn't burst into tears?
No.
Okay, good.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
No. The only time I do that is when I get really mad.
Okay.
Yeah.
More on that.
Yeah. Let's see, I had done all those things. I actually applied for a position somewhere else, a bigger airport, and was offered the job and turned it down because it just didn't seem right at the time. My boss knew what I was doing because the airport industry is very small. As I discovered tonight, this gentleman right here, Steve, has actually served on a board up in North Carolina of an airport board. So it's a small community, so I made sure my boss knew what I was doing. He was very supportive. When I turned it down, he said, oh my God, thank goodness, I was going to have to hire 3 people to replace you. And I said, I took it as a compliment, and then it's kind of stuck right there.
Yeah.
And I waited, it was probably about a year before I went back in and said, look, you said I'm your chief of staff, you said it would take 3 people to replace me, NNN, why don't I have the title to go with it? And he said, I was wondering when you were going to get around to asking me that. So, lesson learned, men expect and I shouldn't generalize that way. It may not be all men. But some men, a lot of men, expect you to ask the question. Don't wait for somebody to
Offer it.
offer it. Exactly. And that goes back to the salary when I first got here, and how at that point I was just thankful to have a job.
Yeah. Let's veer off a little bit, and then we'll get back to the Aviation Authority, because I think it's fascinating how you have been able to survive in this fairly traditional male environment. But talk a little bit about your family. How did you meet your husband?
Through work. We worked together in Crystal City, and he actually gave me one of those pickup lines of, "You remind me of one of your sisters," and I remember thinking, "Oh, danger, my mother told me about guys like you." But the more I was around him, the more I liked him, and actually enjoyed, he's just the kind of person, great sense of humor, enjoys people, very intelligent, sports-minded, just a good all-around guy, and he opened up my world.
That's fantastic. Did you have work-life balance during those early years?
Early years, yes. It wasn't as challenging as it has been for the last probably 10 years.
Talk about that a little more, and talk about what your job entails. I have to, just from my own ignorance, when I discovered that Sue's not just the director of the airport, okay? She has responsibility for the airport, Boeing, all that land out there, and the Air Force Base. That's what Sue does, right?
And 2 other airports.
Tell us about you've got the other 2?
Yeah.
Johns Island and
Johns
Mount
Island
Pleasant?
and Mount Pleasant, yes, yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, just in real simple terms, what an airport manager does is it's very similar to a property manager at a mall. And this is an oversimplification, but to me it's the best analogy to make it make sense. At a mall, you've got to keep it clean, you've got to lease space to your vendors, you got to make sure the food court makes everybody happy and has the proper balance of goods and services and the concessions, and all, we were talking earlier about that. You keep it clean, you keep the lights turned on, you make sure it's safe and all that sort of stuff. Well, take an airport, add airplanes out the back door, lots of cars out the front door, and security in between. It's a lot more complex, I think, than being a property manager, but it involves a lot of the same issues. So we have about 150 employees that work for the Aviation Authority, and our tenants, Delta Airlines, the rent-a-cars, the food and beverage people, they all have leases with us. That's how we create our revenue. We don't get tax dollars. We're not on the county tax rolls. All our money is user-generated. Fees and leases, and we're a business. We run like a business, and we have to run like a business because we don't have any other backup revenue sources.
Right.
Most of our revenue comes from cars, not airplanes, which people always find amusing. Because of the rental car activity and parking, that helps keep our rates and charges to the airlines low, which is important to keep us competitive. It doesn't affect the price of an airline ticket. Let me say that one more time. Our rents do not impact the price of an airline ticket. That is set by supply and demand. Just like the outfit you buy at the outlet mall has nothing to do with the rent charge. It's about that suggested retail price, if you will. It's all about supply and demand. So we have about 150 employees. We have our own police department that are full-fledged police officers, carry guns, full arrest powers, and so on. We have our own personnel, HR, human resources department, our own accounting. Just think of all the functions in a company with a large physical plant, almost $200 million in assets. That's what we do. We cut the grass, we maintain the buildings, we have a contract with a janitorial service, make sure the bathrooms are clean, and we manage all that. There's roughly 15,000 people a day who come through the international airport. About 8,000 passengers, and double that for the meet and greets, all the employees. There's about 1,200 employees a day that work there. So it's like a city with everybody passing through all the time.
What's the relationship with the Air Force?
Very unique, actually. The United States Air Force actually owns the airfield in Charleston. And that's very unusual. In most airports, like Columbia, for example, the airport manager and the airport authority actually own, operate, and maintain the airfield. Here in Charleston, the Air Force does that, and we do that through a joint use agreement with the Air Force. We provide the FAA control tower. The Air Force provides crash fire rescue. So there's a very good relationship there between us, and that we help each other.
Yeah.
Because if they weren't there, we'd have to have our own fire department. Mm-hmm. If we left, the FAA wouldn't be there, and the Air Force would have to man that control tower.
Is the sequester going to have an impact on Charleston's airport?
We're still monitoring that. We get kind of mixed reviews. You've read in the paper where they talked about the towers closing, and none of our towers, we only have one tower. Johns Island and Mount Pleasant Regional don't have a tower. They're uncontrolled fields. The tower here at International may close 12 to 6 kind of time frame, but that's still being looked at. It'll depend a lot on the Air Force and what we can do with that.
Because the Air Force will take a cut, as will the FAA, as will the Security Administration.
Yes.
Because they're all federal agencies.
That's right.
I was in Washington last week, and there's a frenzy going on up there. It's just stunning. It's just completely dysfunctional. Talk a little bit about bringing Southwest and JetBlue here. How involved do you get in those economic development projects?
Very involved. When I became director, we didn't have AirTran at that time. They had left us several years before for their own reasons, not really because of Charleston.
Right.
Air service is a really interesting concept or dynamic piece of what we do, because you've got to look at the quality of the air service that you have. What cities can you get to easily with direct service? You have to look at the quantity of flights. If you only have one flight a day, that doesn't do the business person any good. And it has to be at a reasonable price. And I know reasonable is, everybody has a different perception of that. But you have to have all three of those things to have a healthy airport. And I think we have that. We have, as far as the quality of our service, we have direct service to 17 destinations now. Boston added. Southwest obviously added several cities as well. We have the quantity. We have about 120 flights a day.
Really? That
Almost
many?
5,000 seats, in and out. That's in and out.
Right.
Okay, round trip. 5,000, almost 10,000 total in and out seats now. Is that right, Judy? 5,000 is one way, and so 10 is round trip. Judy Olmstead, Director of Finance, helping me out here, make sure.
Numbers.
So we have the quality and the quantity, and our prices, the cost of airfare has come down. We have very little impact on that. We can lobby the airline and say, hey guys, you're really missing an opportunity here, because everybody's driving to, who did I hear, Cincinnati earlier? Somebody was talking about airfare to Cincinnati and how expensive it was. There's all this pent-up demand, so help us out here and you'll make money in the process. So we work with them in that regard. The Southwest deal, and actually prior to that, the AirTran deal, was a lot of fun. What happened when I became director, one of my first initiatives was to build relationships in the community. The airport had run pretty independently of the chamber, the CVB, the Regional Development Alliance. We were kind of our own little group out there. And I thought it was important to get everybody to the table and to understand what air service development is all about and how it works. in a lot of cities you hear people complain, oh, that airport director never, doesn't care about air service development and never does anything in that regard. That's normally not true, but that's the perception. What I wanted to do was bring the other stakeholders to the table and say, okay, here's what it takes to bring an airline in. Let's work together to do it.
Good for you.
So we partnered with those agencies, Helen Hill at the CVB, Mary Graham at the Chamber, David Ginn at the RDA, and us. And I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing anybody there as I say that. I think I've got everybody. And we hired an air service consultant to work with us, because those are the guys that have the numbers, that know how to talk to the planners, who are all economists. Their majors, their degrees are in economics, and they study the numbers. Well, one of the things we were able to do is to tell them the story behind the numbers. And let me give you one example. Okay. JetBlue and Boston service. If you look at the number of people who fly from here to Boston and compare it to the information the CVB captures, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, on how many people want to come here. They've got that data that says X thousand of people, X number of people a year, hit the website and say, hey, I think I want to go to Charleston. Let's see what's there. Well, they can compare that to the number of people who actually come, and they have those stats for all these different cities, and say, you know what? Boston's underserved. We were able, by working with the CVB and our air service consultant, to pull that data together into information, show them how that pent-up demand in that market, go in both directions, not just us going there, but them coming here, and convince the airlines that there was a market to be served. So there's a lot of coordination with other folks, convincing and showing the airlines, and this was good for AirTrans, Southwest, and JetBlue. Our college population was important, especially to Southwest and JetBlue. Our second home market was another area that doesn't really show up in the stats anywhere. We know how many hotel rooms we have, how many beds we have in hotels, and we track the occupancy, but nobody had ever looked at the number of second homes and where those people came from. So we were able to show some of that data as well.
It's amazing you can capture that.
Some of that is difficult to do. Yeah. We were able to get pieces of it here and there. I wouldn't say we got a complete picture on everything, but we got enough to tell the story.
I was asking you earlier, Colonel Martha Meeker, now General Martha Meeker, who spoke at our Women in Business conference, I think it was 3 years ago, told me when I had that brief time to talk with her, how much she enjoyed working with you, and I believe it was several other women when the earthquake hit Haiti, and all of a sudden you were in the middle of it. Do you want to talk a little bit about that effort?
Sure. Yes, when the earthquake hit Haiti, the Air Force kicked into what they call repatriation mode. What that means is the Air Force will go in, because all commercial service has been suspended, and they will take civilians, put them on C-17s.
American civilians.
American. Mostly American, but not necessarily. I think there may have been some Haitians as well. But they will put people on those planes and bring them to Charleston, process them through our side of the airport, not the Air Force Base side, but the civilian side. We have an international concourse that doesn't get used a lot, unfortunately, but it's there. And we set up the American Red Cross and all kinds of other aid agencies to help these people get into the U.S. legally and work through that process. Now keep in mind, if they're coming from Haiti and the earthquake, they may not have their passport, they may not have any cash. When we had the invasion in Grenada, we had a repatriation exercise, and there were people who were literally wrapped in towels and other people's clothes because the military went in and said, come on, we're getting you out of here. There were a lot of students they brought back, American students. Yep. So we worked with Colonel Meeker through that, along with Debbie Engel with the TSA, and were able to help a lot of folks through that It's very challenging doing that sort of thing. You're kind of on call 24/7, which we are anyway, but you're not just on call. You're there for several weeks because they came in shifts, if you will. But it was neat to be able to help with that.
Any other effort that you've been involved in out there that really is one you're never going to forget?
9/11. It's the first thing that came to my mind when you said that. 9/11 was one of those days. I know we can all remember where we were when it happened and when we heard it. I was at the airport. I was deputy director. Well, I think I still had the title of CFO at that point, but I was working as deputy director. Judy, I think, had just started working there, right?
We were talking in my office,
Yep, that's right. And my husband called to say, hey, you may want to pay attention. There's been a plane that's hit the World Trade Center. I said, oh, probably general aviation, kind of didn't think too much of it. He called back 10 minutes later, or however many minutes it was, and said, no, something bad's going on. Get that. So we immediately got the TV turned on, and within about 25 minutes, we had 12 full-size aircraft on the ground, because if you recall, the FAA said, get them down. And in fact, if you read some of the accounts of that day, the airlines were telling their pilots to put the planes down before the FAA told them to. There were, I want to say it was United and American, but I'm not sure of that, who their control centers realized something wasn't right. They didn't know what it was, but they just ordered them all to the ground. So our staff, including the accounting department, didn't matter what department you were in, it was all hands on deck. And we were down in the terminal helping people. We had one flight in particular that was an international flight. People couldn't get to their luggage, didn't have enough diapers, all those sorts of things. So we did a little bit of everything that day. And it was rewarding, challenging, and something I hope I never have to do again.
Yeah, exactly. I understand. Talk a little bit about the culture out there and what you've done with that culture since you've been in charge. What has inspired you? What keeps you going?
A couple things keep me going. One is just the customer service aspect of helping people. Travel can be stressful. We have to remember that. It's difficult because we're so familiar with that environment, we forget that others aren't. And so we have to be mindful of that. And one of the real challenges of airport management is that all people remember is if they had a good or a bad experience at the airport. It doesn't matter if it was a lost bag from an airline or a bad cup of coffee or a bad experience with TSA. It's always that darn airport. And we are the first and last impression that people get. So it's very important that we are proactive. And one of the things we've adopted within the staff is, and I don't want to, this is not an original thought, I believe it was Walt Disney who said, even if it's not our fault, it is our problem. So let's figure out how to help. And we do that on a regular basis. As the airlines have cut back staff, our staff has had to become more involved in just customer issues, helping with lost bags, for example. Nowadays you get a 1-800 number. It's hard to get to a person. So our people are at the information desk, for example, can help navigate through that process and hopefully take a little bit of the frustration out of it for people so that they have a good experience.
So you're leading the troops on that one.
Absolutely.
That's the mantra from within.
Yes.
Talk about just management in general. You brought some books with you, and I was chiding you a little bit about leaning in with Sheryl Sandberg. We can agree to disagree maybe on part of that. Well, we won't get into it. But what has been your inspiration? Who's out there that has been a role model or has created an environment that you would like to replicate?
Well, I think first and foremost, I've already mentioned, is my mom.
Yeah.
She definitely is a huge part of who I am today and the way I do things. And treating people fairly, always firm but fair. I think that's the culture of the organization. The other thing we're very proud of, and that one of the things that makes me tick, is developing our employees. We have numerous employees we can point to that came in at entry-level jobs and have worked their way up into the organization. And I take a lot of pride in that. That, to me, is what makes it worthwhile, is being able to develop others. Male, female, black, white, doesn't matter. Just if there's potential there, let's mine it. Let's develop it. And even if they go somewhere else because they outgrow us, that's a great thing. I'd rather have a developed employee who's motivated and feeling good about their work than to have someone who's retired in place at 25.
Ooh.
You know?
Yeah.
I want people to feel good about what they do. We spend way too much time with work not to enjoy what we do.
No, absolutely. You were mentioning Anne Morrow Lindbergh earlier. You want to?
Yeah.
She had some really interesting things to say about her. Do y'all all know who Anne Morrow Lindbergh was?
Does anybody does anybody want to comment if they remember who Anne Morrow Lindbergh is? No? Huh?
She flew around the world, right? Or did she?
Well, she helped her husband fly. Yes.
His
but
name
good
was
for
Charles.
you. The
Charles
thing
Lindbergh.
yeah, she was married to Charles Lindbergh. The thing I always, and the first thing you said about her was that she lost her son in a terrible kidnapping, and they think he was killed. I'm trying to remember. I don't think they
It
ever
was in
actually
like I
found
was
the
just
body.
in the museum in Washington, and they had this whole wall about how literally the Lindberghs had just built this house out in the country, and it was sort of sparse around there. And there was a ladder that was put up to the second floor, and somebody went and grabbed the baby. And of course, the baby was big news. You know, Charles Lindbergh was the biggest hero of the moment, and the baby was kidnapped.
Yes, exactly. And that's kind of what we remember her for. And she wrote a book called Gift from the Sea, which is a nice book. She was an author. But this is a novel I just finished reading called The Aviator's Wife. And what struck me about it is how accomplished she was in her own right, but it wasn't popular to do that at that time. She was the first female glider pilot in the U.S. She was one of the first radio operators. She knew how to navigate by the stars. She was her husband's co-pilot on many, many trips. She was a real pioneer in her own right, but I didn't know that till I started reading a little bit more. So I found that very interesting. She held back a lot. She didn't lean in. And that's what got me to the Sandberg book, which I just started. So I may not have gotten to the part yet where we'll, that you were talking about. But what this said to me was the importance of standing up for yourself and being heard. And also recognizing that when you do that, sometimes there will be pushback. And I think the comment I made to you earlier is, I leaned in last summer. And that's when things got kind of interesting.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Another conversation I was having before we got started was the fact that women like to be liked. We tend to be pleasers. We tend to take care of others. That's that nurturing instinct, and that's not a bad thing. It can work to our benefit, and I think that building relationships I talked about earlier, I think that's one of the things we do really well, is building bridges to others.
Yes.
The discussion earlier, or before the meeting, was the fact that we like to be liked, and how sometimes in business, and not just business, but in professions when you're doing things, if everybody likes you, you're probably not doing everything you need to be doing. It's a pretty good bet. And I learned through my years at the airport, I mean, I've had to fire people that, you know, nobody ever likes to do that. I've had to beat up on contractors and tell people they weren't doing their job, that sort of thing. So I've kind of gotten used to that. But what I've learned is that as long as I keep my moral compass, people who disagree with that moral compass, then that's their issue, not mine. It's okay that they don't like me because we probably don't have a lot in common anyway. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do the right thing for the right reasons. And the day I can't do that is the day I walk away from any situation.
Right.
But doing the right things for the right reasons.
Well, you have an all-male board.
I do.
And when that came out in the paper, what was it, 4 or 5 months ago? Mm-hmm. I knew Sue, we haven't spent a lot of time together, but I think I called you.
You did.
And I said, I'm outraged that there are no women on the Aviation Authority Board and that there's a vacancy. I'm going to apply for it. And you said, go for it. Mm-hmm. And I filled out my application. I submitted it to the legislative delegation, sent out copies to all of them and the members of the Aviation Authority Board, and said, okay, I've done everything right. I actually ran into Joe Riley, who's on your board.
Yes.
And I said, Joe, I'd appreciate your support. There are no women on the board. And to his credit, he said to me, I hate to admit this, but I didn't realize that because Sue was at all the meetings. I said, yes, but she's not a member of the board. He said, you're right. Not only did I not hear anything, but I think the replacement was done in a phone call.
That's what I read in the paper, yes.
And another, surprisingly, no offense, a white man was picked. Mm-hmm. So, I really felt for you during that. And I mean, can you share with us some of the strategies you use? I mean, how do you lean in when you're dealing with that particular group of people or any, predominantly of the other gender?
Well, I think, let's see, a couple of things. I've had to face the same thing in the industry because when I first started, there were very few women in leadership roles at airports. That has changed, I'm pleased to say. We started a group called Women in Aviation, and there were, I think, 8 of us when we started it 7 or 8 years ago, and now the list has grown. It's very good. So that's very pleasing to see. I think one of the things that's important to emphasize when we talk about boards and diversity on boards is the importance of different perspectives. What I see is when you have too many people of the same background and same perspective, it just doesn't work as well. You need that diversity to bring different perspectives to a situation. And it's not about male or female, it's about making the collective body stronger and more vibrant. And I think that's what gets lost sometimes when we start talking about whether it's male, female, black, white. We lose that perspective, and I think it is very important. I think the dynamics between the people changes when there's diversity at the table, and I don't just think that. I've seen it when we had females on the board. There was just a different chemistry than all men. That's just the reality of it. I'm not going to try to comment on the good or the bad of it, but it is definitely a different dynamic.
You want to talk a little bit about Lean In?
Yeah. I think the importance of leaning in is being confident in who you are and understanding there's going to be pushback whenever you lean in any situation. And you don't have to be in the top job to lean in. Leaning in was asking my boss 10 years ago, hey, if I'm so great, how come you haven't made me deputy director? That's leaning in. Leaning in was 20 years ago when I asked for support to get my accreditation in my field. So you can lean in no matter where you are in your career. And I think that really means standing up for yourself and recognizing your abilities, not waiting to be recognized.
Great advice. Thank you.